Thanks everyone for joining today's webinar. Today's webinar will be a 45-minute or so presentation, followed by a question and answer session. If you have any questions during the webinar today for Paul, please use the Q&A or the chat features. And at the end of the presentation, I will ask your questions to Paul. So now I'd like to introduce you to Paul Tumolo. Paul is the founder and managing director at Edisalt Business Transformation and faculty at Harvard Extension School. He is the designer and implementer of the trademarked consultant methodology. In this time, Paul has designed, developed, and led a number of transformational, organizational, and leadership development consultant programs that have enabled the clients to advance their process and project management strategies. Companies such as Harvard Management Company, Boston Scientific, LoJack, Vantage Travel, Harvard Medical School, and Fidelity have utilized Paul and his company for improved organizational performance. Paul is considered a Lean Six Sigma expert in implementing project and program management and process excellence both at the strategic and tactical levels. He has worked on many long-term assignments in Europe, Asia, and the US, managing major change-driven projects for some of the largest institutions in the world. Paul holds a BS in Industrial Management from Northeastern University, an MBA in Business and Organizational Development from Bryant University, and resides in the greater Boston area. He is an accomplished business coach, an avid reader, gardener, auto restorer, and loves animals. So without any further ado, I now turn it over to you, Paul, for today's webinar.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate the nice introduction. Good morning, everybody. Paul Tumolo here. Today, we're going to talk about project management. And as you know, project management is an art and a science. So, what's your experience with project management? As you can see by this meme from The Office, which is a great show, by the way. So, I like managed projects. What does that mean? How do you become successful in designing, developing, and implementing a project in your organization? There's really no specific clear answer for that, but there are a number of key points that you can utilize when you're doing it to help increase your success rate. So what is a project? It's temporary. It's something to provide a unique product, service, or result in your organization. So that means it's never been done before. That requires you to do the design work and plan it to try to make sure that you implement it successfully. You're trying to accomplish a singular goal. And it's usually people who don't work together from different organizations and multiple geographies. It's matrix management. One of the challenges in project management, in matrix management, is alignment. How do I, as the project manager, get my team members to be aligned on the goals and objectives of the project? That's one of the key challenges in project management, is alignment. So as we're going through this presentation, think about, how do I get everybody to see through the same set of eyes, to have a common understanding of the same goals and objectives, and to drive the initiatives forward so we all can have a common successful output. Some examples of a project would be, developing new software, construction of a building or bridge, expansion of sales. These are projects. They're all something new and unique, and something that has to be designed, developed, planned, and implemented. And the goal is to deliver it on time, on budget, and into specification, and have the learning integration that the organizations will need. One of the key points of project management is, what did we learn what are we learning as we're going through the project, and what did we learn when the project is complete? That's key. There'll be more on that later. And a key skill in project management is managing with influence. Project managers are not the direct boss of the people. They do not manage with authority. So being able to manage with influence and be able to lead and sell during the whole project management lifecycle process is absolutely key. So the project manager has to have a number of skills, and this is a key one, because at the end of the day, if the project manager cannot align his resources or her resources to get the job done, the project will not be successful. And innovation comes from successful project implementation. So when you want to move your strategic plan forward, you need to have project management driving the change, and that change drives innovation. And the innovation comes from having the project deliver on time, to budget, and to spec. Success is hard. And I've done a lot of research in this over the past 25 years or so. And if we look at technology, success is improbable in 68% of projects. Improbable means that you may miss on cost, quality, or delivery of what you said you were going to have. Poor requirements analysis causes many of these failures. What that means is a lot of projects fail before they start. Is the project feasible? Is it doable? Do you have the right resources? Do you have the budget? Is the organization supportive? Do you have the right alignment? There's a lot of factors that come into play when you're talking about poor requirements, but the bottom line is the project has to be feasible before you start. And we're going to talk about a tactic that I use called the pre-mortem. And that's really important to make sure the requirements are doable. So if you don't have good requirements, you end up paying a premium to deliver the project on time and budget, because you may have to get extra resources, spend more time, have do-overs. There's a lot of reasons why the projects exceed their budget. So one of the key points here is that you really have to have a clear plan of execution to make sure your requirements are feasible for the project to be successful. If you take IT, for example, 41% of the budget will be consumed by poor requirements, which means rework and redos of doing it versus optimizing the launch and kickoff of the project. So there's a lot of data that supports this, but the bottom line for you as a project manager is, do I have the feasibility at the start, and can I get support for that feasibility in the organization? Do we have the right business analysis skills to deliver the projects on time? Do you understand the business, which I call KTB, know the business? And also KTP, know the process, and KTC, know the customer. In this case, interchangeably, we use customer and stakeholder as the recipient of the outcome of the process. Now, one of the methodologies that I use on my projects in my consulting business is I adapt Agile into all my project management work. And I use something called rapid results initiatives to minimize project risks. And what that means is that Being agile means you can adapt to changes on the fly to the requirements of the project and what the stakeholders want. And rapid results initiatives give you a short window to look at direction and forward advancement to make sure that you want to minimize project risk by avoiding them. It's called risk mitigation strategies, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. One of the things that's key about having a successful project is the ability to manage the project management life cycle. And it's pretty simple. It's a 4-part process. First one being initiating the project. How do you kick off or green light a project to get it started on the right foot? Number 2, how do you plan the project to make sure that you've got the right resources, the budget, the right milestones in place to make sure that it runs smoothly? The third step is how do you execute, monitor, and control it over the life cycle of the project? And the fourth part is closing out the project. Now, one of the key points in the entire project management life cycle is something that I utilize called Tacit to Explicit organization knowledge transfer. And what that is you build in to your different plans and the tools that I'm going to go over in a moment, how to bring tacit knowledge, which is in people's heads, and make it explicit so the organization can not only understand what's going on, but they can participate in supporting the project to make it succeed. This is an absolute key point because a project has a brand and the project manager has to sell the brand in the organization to make sure that the internal and external stakeholders understand where the project is, where it's going, and what it's going to deliver. Now, I don't want to underestimate the point, but there's a lot of learning that has to be done as the project goes through its life cycle. And as the project manager, what you want to be able to do is spread that learning throughout the organization because the organization becomes smarter by doing it. I've developed a toolbox. Some of these tools may be familiar to you, some of them may not be, but let me go through them and show you how we would integrate those with the project management life cycle. First of all is something called a pre-mortem. I like to have a pre-mortem done before the project starts so we can engage the project team and all the stakeholders to discuss the project, its direction, its speed, and also talk about what needs to be delivered and what could potentially go wrong. This is an absolute key step in project management, in my opinion, because what it basically does, it brings the perspective of all the salient stakeholders and project team members into a common pool of knowledge where everybody's on the same page. What that basically does, it helps build support in the organization from the project sponsor to the project manager, and it also helps drive common alignment for the purpose of delivering the project. I also use something called change rewards visioning. What changes is the project going to make, and what rewards will you get out of them when they're done? And the reason I use this, it helps develop the vision of what the project is going to deliver. And the bottom line is that this visioning helps keep everything in the forefront of what's happening on the project and keeps people aligned to what's going on. The third tool is a project charter. That is a description of what the project is doing. And what it basically does, it's the written rules and guidelines of the entire project, which basically allows people to follow the project management story throughout the whole entire project management process. And it also includes who's going to do the project, what's going to be done, how it's going to be done, where it's going to be done. And it also includes other salient pieces like the budget and some of the other tools that we'll be talking about. Then there's a project management schedule, which is characterized by the work breakdown structure of tasks and milestones. And that's typically managed by a number of, could be managed by a number of software products like Microsoft Project or Rike or Asana or Smartsheet. There's literally hundreds of software programs that do this work breakdown structure. But the key point here is it helps you manage budget, it helps you manage resource, and it helps you manage time. I also have a stakeholder map process that I use that maps out the interest, power, and support of salient stakeholders on the project. And what this allows you to do is to manage your stakeholders who have power and influence over your project. Do not underestimate the fact that stakeholders have a major part of control in how the project runs. And as a project manager, what you want to be able to do is manage them successfully to utilize and leverage their power, their influence, and their position on the project to help make the project succeed. Another tool that I've developed is a communications plan. Who does the project manager communicate with? What does the project manager say to these people? And how do you control the flow of communications to the stakeholders, both internally and externally, in the organization? This is a key point for selling, supporting, and being sure that the project is being dialogued correctly in the organization so everybody knows what's going on. And what that helps do, it helps minimize any gaps or white space that the project may have, so it doesn't cause questions or concerns in the organization. I also develop a risk register, which helps quantify and qualify risk and helps drive the right mitigation plan to make sure risk is avoided. One of the key problems in project management is that the way you find risks, you find them after they become a problem. I like to have the prospective methodology of finding the risks before they happen and having a mitigation strategy to avoid them. That is a much safer way to keep the project on time, on budget, and to deliver the right results by minimizing and eliminating risks before they happen. And then I also like to conduct a post-mortem, something I call wins and sins. How did the project go? What went well and why? And what didn't go so well and why not? And that's part of the tacit to explicit knowledge transfer that needs to happen to bring all this into the organization, so the organization IQ will increase and they'll become smarter by understanding what happened with the project and how well it went and what we could do to have continuous improvement. So if I take the project management lifecycle and take the tools that we talked about, change rewards and pre-mortem would be under initiating at the start. Project charter, stakeholder map, and risk register would be into planning. Project schedule and communications would be under monitoring and controlling. And closing out the project would be the post-mortem. So what I've basically done is developed a matrix where the tools are implemented to maximize their leverage in the entire process to make sure we gain maximum performance and minimize risk and poor performance. Now, one of the key points in project management is about change management. All projects are driving change in the organization. The main point here is, how do you manage that change, and how do you control the change using project management as the vehicle of moving forward from where you are today, or what I call the as-is state, to getting to the to-be or the future state. So all projects go from current state to future state, and the project management plan is basically the journey and the roadmap to go from where you are today to where you want to be in the future. So it's a transition. And one of the key points here is to be able to manage change with people. And people in the organization, whether they're stakeholders or not, the key is to make sure that they embrace, adopt, and use the techniques under project management in the project management lifecycle process to make it work. The project manager must be able to balance the technical aspects of the project with the people side. Project manager is a key role in any organization. They're change agents. They need a methodology to make the project goals be in alignment with the project team and the organization. And the bottom line here is that projects are derived from the strategic plans of the organization. How comfortable are project managers with change and complexity in dynamic environments? They shift easily between big picture and small details and know how to concentrate on both. So a project manager is not only a strategist, but a technician as well. You know, you need to have great people skills as a PM, and you need to be able to develop trust and communication with the project stakeholders. Trust is a key word. When people trust the PM, they tend to give resources and support and help the project managers succeed. The PM also needs to have a broad and flexible toolkit of techniques. How to resolve complex interdependent activities into tasks and subtasks that are documented, monitored, and controlled through the work breakdown structure, or also known as the project plan. And then as the world has changed and become much more global, everything is sped up. Change has become faster, and organizations have more and more put more energy into developing projects as a strategy, where change management is being driven by a number of projects, typically in a project portfolio. And a lot of companies have adapted project management organizations where resources are directly applied to projects to drive them to successful completion. Change does not happen without projects. Projects drive initiatives, and initiatives help support the strategy and get you to where you need to be. One of the key areas that a project manager has to be able to manage is something called project team dynamics, or force field alignment. What I found throughout my many years of doing this is that people, processes, practices, procedures, and politics, the 5 Ps, are all key to be able to align the project goals and objectives and to get it done. And one of the skills the PM needs to have is to be able to leverage forces enabling the changes that need to be done. And they also need to be able to manage the forces resisting the change. So leveraging forces that are on your side helps you move the project forward. And then resisting and overcoming the forces resisting the change helps you mitigate risk. And once you identify what I call the P5, it helps you understand where your project is in the organization and where you need to put your efforts in order to move the project forward. Do not underestimate politics in any organization. That's a key point to overcome. And don't underestimate the fact that the hardest thing to change in life are people, in people's minds. So this is a key strategy for a project manager to go from the current state of today and to push the project into the future state of tomorrow. So what are we aiming to do with project management? Well, we want to align our projects with strategic objectives, increase organizational alignment, increase transparency, maximize the use of our talent, and align with the strategic plan in the organization. Projects also are aimed at reducing costs, improving efficiencies, improving the quality of work in the organization. We want to enhance our risk management and mitigation. We want to have our projects to deliver on time, to specification, to budget. We want to be able to do it right the first time. FPY is a Lean Six Sigma term called first pass yield. Being able to deliver the project correctly the first time saves money, saves time, accelerates throughput, and allows you to have a better methodology of getting the project completed successfully. And it also drives higher customer satisfaction. In the Lean Six Sigma world, all processes have a customer or a group of customers. In project management, a customer is typically a stakeholder, either internally or externally, that has a vested interest in the outcome of the project. And you want to be able to make sure they're satisfied and you've delivered to them what they need to have delivered. So what's the approach? You need to have a methodology for new project ideas to come forward. Where these ideas come from, where do they start, how do they get dialogued in the organization, how do you conduct due diligence on them and analyze the project ideas for costs and benefits? And then how do projects, given resources and money for implementation, how do you greenlight the project in the organization to make sure that it has the support from all levels of management and it's also staffed appropriately? So projects need to be reviewed in all phases and adjustments need to be made as required as they go along. And an organization also has to have the ability to stop and kill projects if they look like they're not going to be successful. So what I like to do is bracket projects between pre and post-mortem reviews. You know, what are the change rewards we're trying to get? How do we quantify the outcome of a project? How do we measure its success? What key performance indicators do we put in place? How do we compare actual versus expected results? What did we say we were going to do? Did we do it? How did we do it? And do we understand why it happened or why it didn't happen? We need to identify lessons learned, wins and sins. One of the things I really like to do on completed projects is when I do the post-mortem is I come up with a book of wins and sins. That way, future project managers can look back on projects that were done in the organization to see what worked and what didn't work, and not to repeat the same mistakes, but to leverage the things that did work to make sure that we can push the organizational learning forward. I'm a big believer in rewarding accountable people accordingly. I think you need to have the right reward structure in place. For example, I think projects that meet their goals and objectives should have team-based rewards, which typically could be monetarily based. And I think that's a strong motivator for organizations to make sure that people are recognized for delivering what they say they're going to deliver. And one thing that should never be overlooked is, did we have the right amount of organizational learning implemented across the organization from the project, to make sure that we leverage what we learned and then we manage what we learned, and we cannot make the same mistakes twice. So from a holistic overview, how will project management be implemented in your organization? We need to establish a project management culture and mindset. What does that mean? We need to have tools, techniques. We need to have project management as a guideline of how we drive change. And we also need to have the right architecture in place to make sure we have that, so the organization does think in terms of projects as a methodology to drive change in the organization. We need to institute a governance structure. Do we have the tools and techniques in place? Do we speak PM in the organization? Do the projects follow the governance structure to utilize the tools so projects can be monitored and managed in the same way? A lot of the companies that I consult for do this by implementing a PMO, or project management organization, and they institute the tools and techniques, and they actually utilize and use them on all projects. So we have common language, common measurement, and common structure. We have a disciplined PM process that we used. And this is a key point, because having projects follow the same governance, the same rigorous process, allows better control and better management of the projects. And it drives that common language in the organization where people speak project management and they understand each other when projects are being dialogued at different levels of management in the organization. I'm a firm believer in increasing project management training and development. How do we make our people smarter and better? The way you do that is you drive that tacit to explicit knowledge transfer in the organization, where project managers are being asked to dialogue what they're doing, to learn, and then also to bring in training and development to help them become smarter and better in what they do. Accountability for project management and rewards. I talked about that a few minutes ago. The bottom line is that projects are under the microscope. Accountability for the project and responsibility is the organization owns it. And the project sponsor and the project manager drive the project, but the organization needs to be responsible to make sure that everybody on the project team is accountable to deliver what they say they're going to deliver. you need to have PM tools. I talked about my toolbox that I showed you, and they have to be integrated into the project management process. These tools are key. They allow the organization to have a common understanding of how projects work, and the tools need to be leveraged to make sure the project stays on budget, on schedule, and will deliver the results that you need. And also, it also helps put in measurements and metrics that you'll need to make sure the project is successful. Alignment is a key word in project management. People, processes, and projects all need to be aligned, and they're aligned through the project charter and the project plan. And what this basically does, it keeps everybody on a level playing field, on the same page, to make sure that there's a common understanding of what's going on and what's being delivered. We want to have a higher first pass yield on deliverables. We want to do it right the first time. When I do consulting on Lean Six Sigma, one of the key metrics that I use, especially in any type of organization that has a tangible, measurable output, is how do we do it right the first time and have a first pass yield that approaches 100%? That allows you to minimize waste and to help maximize the utilization of your resources and budget. Now, here's an initiation template that I use and I recommend in organizations that I consult with. So we have a summary of recommendations for the project. Where are we now? What does today look like? What is the current state? Where do we want to be? What does the future state look like? Or what do we want it to look like? I characterize that as, what does success look like? Can you articulate it? Do you have the right vision? How do we plan to get there? What do we need? How much, how many, and what resources are required? How long will this take? How much will it cost? What are the risks in the mitigation plan? What are the change reward benefits? Which, how do we quantify the vision? What is the return on investment? How will we measure our success? What I've found by doing this is the dialogue that gets people to start to talk about the details of the project plan, and it starts to break down the strategic vision into a more tactical approach of how we're going to come up with a project plan that has a high level and probability of success. This initiation template I found works really, really well. It drives the right dialogue in the organization, and it allows the project manager to start to build the architecture for his project plan. It helps get people aligned to what the project plan will deliver. I also like to do something called a PP&T, or People, Process, and Technology review of a project. People, roles, responsibilities, skills, organizational structure. What does the process look like? Information, policies, procedures. In technology, what technology is used? What tools are there to maintain and enhance the business? Because when you go in to drive a project and to implement change, you're impacting people, process, and technology. And what I like to do is identify the as-is state of people, process, and technology, gaps, overlaps, weaknesses, strengths, identify common themes, and then develop the to-be state to achieve the significant improvements that you want. The plan has to support these improvements. And what you need to have is people, process, and technology review and plan. So you have a reliable, scalable and support and be supportive of your customers and the business model. Don't underestimate this, because change touches all these areas, and all these areas need to be considered when you're planning for your change. So when you start to implement change, you've taken into consideration what could impact your project in terms of these different areas. This is Sisyphus. Sisyphus is a Greek god who spent eternity pushing the rock up the hill. And that's what it feels like in PM, right? It feels like we're always pushing the rock uphill, because managing change is the typical difficult part of PM. Change is hard. It's the innovator's dilemma. You know, one of the things I found in my career is that ideas are easy, but implementation is tough. People resist change. They don't like to change. They don't want to change. They always say to me, I like it the way it is. We've always done it that way. At put your company name in. It's worked so far. Motives, incentives, and metrics drive all behavior. A key point in PM is, do you understand the motives, the incentives, and the metrics of the organizations that you're going to be impacted? This is a key point. You really need to know what this is, because you're going to be having to impact these areas with the people you're trying to change. Trust is essential. You need to have trust and have people trust you in what you're doing. Alignment is crucial, getting people on the same page, getting everybody to see the same vision, absolutely essential to making the project work. Now, do we have an ROI to calculate the change benefit? You need to build a coalition for change. You need to assess the organization's readiness. Make change relevant to every stakeholder. The project manager is a salesman or salesperson. They need to have a brand, and they need to sell it to the stakeholders, regardless of where they are. How do we measure sustainable performance? I call it my CQD, cost, quality, delivery, are the three legs of the stool for metrics that I use when I'm evaluating project performance. How do I integrate this into the fabric of the organization, the change? And what are the areas that I want to be able to influence as I go and understand? PP&T we talked about, project scope and boundaries, time and schedule management, cost of resources and project requirements, the budget, which is obviously key, quality viewed by the stakeholders, this impact on the stakeholders, the communication plan and execution, the risk management mitigation, and the organizational learning. Here is where I break down my viewpoint of projects and to make sure I integrate this into the project plan. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but here are a lot of the things that you need to keep in mind as a PM. Scope of the project, where are the boundaries? Scope creep, which is deadly. How do you minimize that and stay on track? The work breakdown structure, having a good solid project plan with the critical path. Critical path defined as, what is the longest pathway to get to completion, but is the shortest path to being done? How do I manage slack with my resources and utilize them to my maximum capability? Stakeholders, key in any project plan to manage them. What are my major milestones? How are my tasks driven down? And have I delivered a KPI dashboard to manage cost, quality, and delivery? So I had 45 minutes. It's 10:45. I'll be happy to take questions right now. What are your project management challenges and opportunities? I'd like to hear them. Chris?
Hey, thanks, Paul. That was a great presentation, and you finished right on time. So maybe we can give everyone a couple minutes to think about some questions, and they can use the chat or the Q&A to ask them. I haven't seen much come through yet, Paul, but we'll give it a couple minutes and let people type their questions.
Sure. It was either 100% perfectly clear and there's no questions, or it was totally confusing and no one got it. Hopefully it's the former and not the latter.
All right, Paul. Yeah, I think it was very clear and straightforward. Great presentation.
Thank you.
We have one question that just came in from Kevin. Thanks, Kevin. And it's, in a small company, the same people are usually on every project. How do we maintain excitement and viability for each project?
Well, that's a good question, Kevin. What I like to do is keep the projects highly visible. In a small company, that's not hard. I think having a robust communication plan to make sure that everybody knows what's going on the various projects helps drive some of that excitement. And I also think you need to put in some kind of celebration of, making the budget for this quarter or delivering the milestones and taking into consideration having a good, robust post-mortem process where you can celebrate the success of the projects and make them more visible. I think what that basically does is that builds energy and excitement in the organization. So project management is viewed as an important part of getting the work done and making sure the customers are happy.
Great. Thanks, Paul. And Kevin also said those are great ideas.
Well, thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it.
All right. And then we have another question from the chat. Any software you would recommend for data visualization and analysis?
Yeah, I really like a product called Smartsheet. What that basically does is it shows all the data in all the project management metrics in one singular view. But not to say that that's the only one. I mean, a lot of the new project management software packages do that. And what they do is they integrate things like chat or real simple syndication into them to allow people to communicate in real time, which makes the project more agile and it makes it more cohesive to getting the job done versus having a weekly project management meeting. And I think that's going to be the shift on all the new project management software packages, is to become more integrated in real time. So you can basically work in unison as things happen and as change happens. It can be communicated out to groups. So, but I say take a look at Smartsheet.
Great. Thanks, Paul. I got some more too. Can you give an example on how to manage resistance to change, especially with senior members of the team?
Yeah, what you need to do is, first of all, you have to develop a vision of where you want to go. And then what I typically do, which works really well, is get people in a room and say, here's where we want to go. What are the enablers to getting there, and what are the disenablers to preventing us from getting there? And try to keep pointing out that the goal is shared between the team, and be open to taking ideas from some of the people who are resistant to change. If you saw that team dynamic slide that I showed, I found that works really well to bringing people into alignment. Listen to what people have to say, understand why they're resisting, and to break down their resistance, what you need to do is to have them come up with a better idea. You don't like my idea about this part of the project, please provide a better one that's going to allow us to achieve what we need to achieve. That helps break down resistance and helps you drive the change you need.
Nice. Thanks, Paul. A couple more questions. One is from Maria, and she said the presentation was very clear. However, can you provide a few key ideas or points to help build trust among the stakeholders, especially when you are new to an organization?
Well, the first way to build trust with the stakeholders is to meet with them. And I always like to meet with them face to face and ask them what their success criteria is, and then take into consideration building their input into the plan, and then circling back with them and showing them, for instance, I would build out the project charter and then use that as the common level of understanding. But the way you really build trust is you have to deliver. I would say early in the project, what you really would need to do is have some rapid results initiatives and show forward progression. That builds trust, and that shows the stakeholders that you're moving on the pathway that they want you to move on, and you've made some forward progression.
All right. Thanks, Paul. Another question from the Q&A. Can you elaborate a bit more on how do you predict risks? How do you make sure you have a clear picture of all the risks?
What I do, and I as a PM don't develop the risk register in a vacuum. I create the risk register by not only bringing in the project team, but I also create a risk register by speaking to the stakeholders and reviewing past project performance. The risk register is a living document. What it basically means is that over time, the risks could change, or they may go away, or there's some new ones that may pop up. So it's a living document that you have to manage throughout the entire project lifecycle. But the way you do it is communicating and listening and getting the perspective of all the people involved in the project and integrate that into the register. And then talk about ways to minimize or mitigate those risks and build them into the project plan so you can avoid them and not find out the hard way that you missed it. It's not perfect, but it really helps minimize risk.
Great. Thanks, Paul. I think that's all the questions in the chat. I am going to follow up after the presentation, Oscar, with an email thanking everyone for attending. I'll also attach a certificate of attendance to this 1-hour webinar that you can use for your ASQ certifications. So that should be coming by the end of the week. And if you have any other questions for Paul or for me over at Quality Support Group, you can reach out offline. My email is just chris@qualitysupportgroup.com. And we can answer any questions and talk about any potential training at your organizations as well. So maybe we'll give it another minute, Paul,
Yep.
if anyone has any additional questions. And if not, we can wrap up a little early. I'm sure some of us have some 11 o'clock calls.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to bring up to the group that's listening on the webinar is that I custom design my learning and development training to meet the needs of the organization. So I do not do boilerplate. So once I do a needs assessment for your organization, we would have a dialogue about how I would customize and design the learning and development that's tailored to your organization. That's something that Quality Support Group is known for and what they deliver. And I think that's a key point to keep in mind if you decide to move forward with us to do any type of project management training.
All right, thanks, Paul. All right, I want to thank everyone for joining today. Paul, it was a great presentation.
Thank you.
And if you have any questions, we can continue any conversations with Paul and myself offline. Thank you, everyone.